But hey, we're in a series right now that we are calling All I Need is a Miracle. I don't know if you've ever been there in your life before. I don't know if you've ever had a moment where there was a circumstance in front of you and you wanted that circumstance to change. And so for you, I mean, let's call it what it is. That circumstance for you, it changing is the miracle that you wanted. And we've all probably been there in one way or another, and maybe even for some of us, it's what we want to see God do in our lives. And maybe some of you are there right now. I can assure you there will be moments in your life where you'll be there again. And so our hope with this series is that we would, through this series, that we would condition our hearts in such a way that when we have that feeling, or we need a miracle, or we need God to do something, that our natural inclination would be that our hearts would gravitate immediately to the person of Jesus Christ. Because no matter what you're going through, no matter what you're facing, He is the one who can bring the deliverance that you need. He's the one who can bring your miracle. And so what we're doing is we're studying the 7 miracles that frame John's gospel, and we're just kind of walking through, looking at each of them, looking at what does this show us about the person who brings us miracles, the person of Jesus Christ. And the miracle that we're going to look at this morning, it is a miracle that really builds off of a question that on the surface seems kind of like a silly question. I don't know if you guys have ever heard someone say something to the extent there's no such thing as a bad question. If you ever interact with kids, you know that's not true, right? Like, there are bad questions. Like, is it a good idea for me to preach with a ping pong ball in my mouth? That is a bad question. That doesn't make any sense. Why would I? Like, there are. And so I thought it'd be kind of fun. So on my personal Facebook page and then in the Facebook group, New Life Community Life, I posed the question to you guys, what are some of the worst questions that anyone has ever asked you? I got about 100 responses, and so I can't go through all of them because I don't think that's why you're here, but I got 5 that I really liked that I wanted to share with you. And so these are just from the New Life community, some questions that have come. The first one's from Jessica Scott, and it's this. Context. I'm a professor at one of the colleges here in town, and we're requiring masks for all students for in-person classes. This question wasn't addressed to me directly, but to our faculty discussion board. This is the question. What should I do if a student is coming into class in one of those old-fashioned plague doctor masks? He's technically following the rules, but it's creepy, and I don't like it. Yeah, that's a question. You know, and I just want to say from the outset, for those of you guys watching online and for everybody, that mask is welcome here, okay? Like, if you come in wearing that, like, will the security team follow you around? Yes, they will. But are you welcome? You are welcome in that mask. If someone can get me one, I'll wear that mask just because I want to. That's the vibe we're going for here. So, all right, so that was that one. Here's another one here. This is from Katrina Mitchell. I used to teach forensics, which, if you're not familiar, is competitive speech and debate. The person who asked the question isn't familiar. Maybe many of our 2-day tournaments involve staying overnight. Let me know if you ever preach a sermon on keeping kids in their hotel rooms. Yes. At check-in one night, I mentioned that we were a forensic team. The lady turned kind of white, looked me dead in the eye, and said, "How many bodies do you have on the bus?" Now, I would have looked at her dead in the eye and said, 7. I have 7 bodies on the bus. Because that's how you respond to that question. If you ask me how many bodies I have in my car, 7. I have 7 bodies in my car. All right, the next one. This is from Connie LaRue Hunt. This is just teacher, right? Like any teacher can or if you've ever been in a classroom, this is it. 5th grade boy with bare feet on top of his desk asked, "Miss Hunt, will you please come over to my desk and smell my feet and tell me if you think they smell like vinegar?" Doesn't matter if they smell like vinegar. I'm not smelling them. No, I'm not. And then there's this one from Jenny Keltner. Are those live triplets as I pushed the baby girls in a triplet stroller? Just think about the ramifications of if that answer is no. Yeah. All right, and this last one is from our family ministries pastor, Pastor Ashley Garrett. The first time I met Ryan's grandma, not my grandma, her husband Ryan's grandma, she asked me if I liked his tushy. I was 17. The answer was yes, they're married. So it worked out pretty well for them. Okay, so the miracle we're going to look at this morning is one that if you consider the context, okay, it is one that there's a question that's asked, and it's kind of a strange question. Like everything that's built on this question that Jesus asks, if you look at the question at first glance, it's kind of strange. It's definitely unique. And it's one that the more that you consider it, the more that you would say, really? Like, why are you asking that? But here's the thing. It's Jesus who asked the question. And when Jesus asks the question, it doesn't really matter if it seems strange, because what we find the more that we get to know him is the more that he asks questions, the more he knows what he's doing. And so if you got a Bible, I'll be in John's Gospel, John chapter 5, and we'll start in verse 1. And we're just going to kind of go through the story, a few verses at a time, and I'll talk, and then we'll keep going. So this is John chapter 5, verse 1, and it says this. It says, after this, what is this? This is referring back to the miracle that we looked at last week where Jesus healed the official son with a word. After this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now, there is in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic, which is called Bethesda, or some translations say Bethsaida, which has 5 roofed colonnades. In these lay a multitude of invalids, blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, "Do you want me to heal you, or do you want to be healed?" Interesting question. I mean, when you consider the context, when you consider that Jesus is the one who asked it, when you consider everything around it, it's very, very interesting. I mean, one, where is this happening? It's happening at a place called Bethsaida. And this is a pool where people would go to be healed. That it was a pool where people would go in the hopes of being made well, that so many people would go there, that there were structures around the pool with roofs so that people could wait in the shade to experience their healing. And it wasn't just like some little pool that a lot of commentators believe it was 2 pools right next to each other that was about 318 feet long. That it was an incredible structure where people went for the sole purpose of being healed. And Jesus goes up to this guy at this place, and his question is, do you want to be healed? It almost feels like checking into the ER, and it's like, hey, just so we're clear, do you want me to fix what's going on, or do you just want to keep staying in pain? And so you wonder why. Now, just to give a little bit more context even on the structure of this place and why people believed in the healing, if you have a Bible in front of you, what you'll notice is that verse 4 is not in there, is it? It goes from verse 3 to verse 5, and then if you look in the footnotes, there's verse 4. Now, the reason why that is because there are some manuscripts that don't have verse 4 in it, and so that's why it's in the footnotes, not in the text. It's really not that big of a deal, but it's interesting because what verse 4 does is it gives us insight into what people believed about the waters. Let me read it to you here. This is verse 4. This is why he didn't just jump in the water and jump out of the water and hope to be healed. It's because they believed an angel of the Lord went down at certain seasons into the pool and stirred the water, and whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was healed of whatever disease that he had. So this guy, every day, comes to this pool in hopes of getting close enough to the pool so that when the water was stirred, he could hop in hopes that he'd be made well. Now, John isn't saying that's what was happening. He isn't saying there was an actual angel that did it. He's merely pointing out what the people believed who went there. And so this guy comes in to this place in hopes that this water is going to stir, and it's been described as it would look like it was moving because there were underground springs that would go off from time to time, and so that's why it would stir. And he would wait for that to happen so that he could hop in and be made well. And Jesus looks at him and says, "Do you want to be healed?" And while it seems like a strange question, it's interesting to consider. I mean, think about our experience with people. That there are sick people who don't want to be made well. That they know what it takes, and they don't want to change. I'll give you a couple examples. People with COPD. They know that if they want to be healed, they're going to probably have to stop smoking. But they'll go to a doctor and they'll say, "Do you want me to make you well?" And the truth is, they do, but they don't really want to do all that it takes to be made well. There's also people who have liver issues. Psoriasis of the liver disease, things like that. And they go to be made well, but they know that in order to really be made well, they're going to have to change how they approach alcohol if they really, truly want to be healed. And what happens in these cases from time to time is that people will say, "I do, but I just don't know if I'm really willing to do what it takes to actually be made well." So Jesus is asking this guy, he's like, "Hey, are you willing to count? Do you really want me?" Because here's the thing about Jesus. He doesn't force himself on people. That he's not going to make someone have something they don't want. He doesn't operate like that. And so he looks at him, "Do you want to be healed?" And even given his circumstance, okay, there's a few things contextually that are really important. Okay, so the biblical scholar J.A. Findley, he says in talking about this text that it's probable that should Jesus heal him, should Jesus heal this man, he's going to lose out on money and income that he would have had for being invalid, like the government taking care of him and helping him kind of meet his basic needs, and he would have to go to a working class job where there's a really good chance that the work would be harder than laying by a pool, and he would actually make less income than he would have gotten by the government. So for Jesus to look at this guy, he's saying, "Hey, are you sure that this is what you want me to do? Do you really want me to make you well?" And most people are going to say yes. Most people would, "I'd rather walk. That would be better." But Jesus wants him to consider the cost of his healing. And here's what Jesus is doing this morning here in this room, is he's looking through the text, through the man who he's asking the question to, and he's asking you the same question. And maybe for you, I think we all walked in here. I sure hope so, because if not, it's really awkward for me to say to the person who didn't. And I don't know that he's saying, "Hey, well, do you want me to physically heal you?" But I think what he's saying to each of us through this text, he's saying, "Hey, do you want me to make you well? Are you willing to let me make you well?" And on the surface, I think all of us would think like that guy, right? We think, well, of course, yeah, I want Jesus to make me well. Of course, I want Jesus to heal me. I want Jesus to forgive me of my sins. Yes, I want eternal life in heaven with him. That's absolutely, why would I say no to that? But then you start to think about the cost. And then you have to start asking yourself a question, okay, do I really want that? Because what that means a lot of times is that means that there are things about you that used to define you that you have to no longer let define you. Do you really want him to make you well? That means that there are things in your life that you used to say no to, that following Jesus means you're going to start saying yes to those things. Or there are things that you used to say yes to, that following Jesus means that now you're going to start saying no to those things. That he looks at us and he says, do you really want me to make you well? And I think some of us, we say, well, yeah, of course. And then we count the cost and we're like, do I really want him to make me well? I mean, part of this wellness, part of what he's wanting us to consider and to grapple with is, am I willing to put my faith in someone that I've never seen? Am I willing to put my faith in someone I've never seen, that he's going to take me somewhere that I've never been? And am I willing to give my whole life to that? And what a lot of people do is they respond to that question. I mean, you're here in the church, right? You made it a priority to be here. But what we do is we'll say, okay, Jesus, I get what you're saying. I get the question. I'll do it halfway. Halfway. I'll partially, I'm going to do enough. And here's the problem with that is that when it comes to following Jesus, is that that's not one of the options. He's all or nothing. It's yes or no, that there isn't a maybe. And Jesus addresses this very issue in Matthew's gospel, in Matthew chapter 16. Look at this. He says, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself, take up his cross, and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake will find it. And so last week, our question was, as we looked at the text, is, well, why are you here? Why is this something that you do? Why? And the question this week that the text is posing to each of us is, are we really willing to do what it takes? Are you really willing to do what he asks? Do you have the courage to change and the motivation to follow through with the change that you say that you're going to do? So that's where Jesus takes us. He takes us up to this question. He takes us up to this point as he looks really through that guy. He looks to us, and then this is how the response goes. Let's take a look here in verse 7. It says, the sick man answered him, Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I'm going, another steps down before me. And Jesus said to him, Get up, take your bed, and walk. And at once, the man was healed, took up his bed, and he walked. It's an incredible story. But, I want to consider the guy's response, okay? It's very interesting to me, the way this guy responds. Okay, so Jesus looks at him, and he says, do you want me to make you well? Do you want me to heal you? And you know what you don't see up there? You don't see an emphatic yes. I mean, you really don't. He says, hey, Jesus, and maybe this is just my Protestant work ethic coming out, so if that's it, maybe that you can judge me for that. But what does he do? He just makes excuses. Hey, Jesus, do you want me to make you well? And he says, no one will put me in the pool. Okay, he's in the presence of Jesus Christ, the Son of God, creator of the world, a guy who has done significant miracles all around his region up until this point. He is at a place where there are tons of sick people lying around. Jesus Christ comes to him, looks at him, and says, hey, do you want me to make you well? And he says to Jesus, there's no one to put me in the pool. Like, that might be the worst response to that question ever. No might have been better. Because not only that, here's what it shows us. This guy has horrible theology. That he is in the presence of God Almighty, doesn't even know who he is. And his faith is not in the God who's asking him if he wants to be healed. His faith is in water that's stirred by angels. Not exactly the response that you'd want. But what does Jesus do? He heals him anyways. I mean, think about it. This guy has horrible theology. He doesn't really understand who he's in the presence of. And Jesus doesn't berate him for being wrong, doesn't make fun of him because he believes in an angel stirring this water when it's obviously a spring underground. But instead, what Jesus does in his grace is he deals with his passive response to his direct question by healing him and making him well. It's pretty astounding. And to think about the nature of the miracle that we are seeing here, I mean, it's incredible. Have you guys ever been on, like, maybe interacted with someone who's been on bed rest for maybe a couple months, or maybe you've been on bed rest for a couple months? Like, getting up to walk is kind of a chore, right? Like, your muscles start to atrophy, and like you can't. It's hard. For 38 years, this guy hasn't been able to walk. And so when it says at once, what happened was this man, he grew muscles in his legs. And at once he had the ability to walk. Think of how incredible that must have been. Just imagine what he must have felt in his legs when that happened. Not only does he now have the muscles to be able to pull off something that he was unable to do previously, but he also knows how to walk. I mean, most of you in this room, it took at least 9 months to figure that out. Some of you might have taken 2 years. I'm not pointing at anybody, but you know who you are. And this guy, in a moment, at once, he's walking and he's carrying things. Man, that's like crazy. Talk about a miracle. Talk about something worth celebrating. Like, you put yourself in the community where this is happening. Like, you got to imagine, right? Like, people are going to throw a party. People are going to go nuts. This guy for 38 years couldn't walk, and now he's carrying his mat down the street. Like, they're going to, like, surely they're going to change the name of the town, right? Like, or maybe they'll keep the name of the town the same, but it'll have one of those, like, home of the guy who couldn't walk for 38 years. They'll put it on the sign. Like, there's going to be a party because this guy has experienced something crazy. That's what you would think is going to happen. That's what should happen. But the exact opposite happens. Look at this in verse 9. It says this, "Now that day was the Sabbath." That's where the issue starts. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, "It's the Sabbath. It's not lawful for you to take up your bed." Just think about that statement. For 38 years, he couldn't take up anything, and now he's walking in the street on the Sabbath, and their response is, "Dude, what are you doing?" So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, and he answered them, "The man who healed me, that man said to me, take up your bed and walk. They asked him, who is the man who said to you, take up your bed and walk? Verse 13. Now the man who had been healed did not know who it was, for Jesus had withdrawn as there was a crowd in the place. Not the response you would expect to the type of miracle that guy experienced. But I mean, think of your life. I imagine you probably experienced something similar. Maybe God did something really cool in your life, in your circumstance. Maybe there was a blessing that came your way or something that you've always wanted and dreamed of, and it happened for you. And it was your miracle. Did everyone readily celebrate with you when that happened? Were there people who saw what God did in your life, and instead of celebrating with you, they were jealous? They made excuses, they judged you, and this guy's just experiencing that. You have these religious leaders who, they want authority. They want power. They want to be important. That's what they care about. And they see this man walking, and here's what they're realizing. They realize as they see him walk that they're losing their authority. They're losing their power. They're going to lose their control if much more of this happens. And here's just like a detail that's so interesting in this text, is that this guy doesn't even know who Jesus is. They ask him, hey, who is the person that healed you? And he legitimately doesn't know. So if you were here last week and you were to compare this miracle with last week's miracle, these stories are so different. That last week you had a guy who traveled 20 miles just because he heard that Jesus could heal people. He finds Jesus, and he just begs him over and over to heal his son, and then finally Jesus heals him with the word. And then here this week you have a guy who doesn't even know who Jesus is, who Jesus seeks out, finds him, and heals him in spite of, it seems like he's not super interested in being healed. And here's what this shows us is we're calling this all I need is a miracle. As some of us are looking for God to do things in our life that we want to see him do. It's such an important reminder for us to remember. We don't put him in a box. We can't determine how he's going to do certain things. That some of us might look ahead at circumstances that seem very daunting, very unlikely, very impossible. And you think, man, there is no way that God's going to work. There's no way that God is going to be able to help me. And the truth is, just because we don't see how doesn't mean that he won't. That he's who we look to when we need a miracle, because it's not a formula. We just trust him with what we have and with what we need. But the issue here at play is one when it comes to the Sabbath, okay? And maybe for those of you who are unfamiliar with the Sabbath, and it's one of the 10 Commandments is that you should honor the Sabbath by keeping it holy. And the idea behind the Sabbath is that God, when he created the world, he did so in 6 days, and on the seventh day, he rested. And since God rested on the seventh day, you too should rest. And really the heart behind the law, it was written to a group of people, the people of Israel who had just been delivered from slavery to Egypt. Part of the heart behind the law is what God wanted these people to see is that you're worth more than the work that you do. That when you're slaves, it's all about just working really hard. He's saying, hey, no, you get a break now. That God gave them this command as a way to bless them, as a way to refresh them. And really, it's for us, too, that we can be blessed and refreshed and just enjoy the presence of God without the pressure of things that we have to do. that it was given as a blessing. But what happened in Jesus' time is these religious people, they took this gift from God, and instead of treating it as a gift, they made it a burden. And so instead of just people being able to rest, they're like, okay, let's really define what rest is. So the fact that the man was carrying his mat, well, that would have been in violation with what the religious people added to the law, because you were only allowed to carry your mat 1,000 feet. Anything beyond that would be considered work, and you weren't allowed to, and he had carried it more than 1,000 feet. They actually would, when they would carry things on the Sabbath, they had a rope that they would tie to themselves just so they would know they wouldn't go too far. That doesn't seem like a blessing. That kind of seems like a burden. They missed the point of the law. And one of my favorite rules that they added to the Sabbath was that, and it makes me wonder why, they had rules about how you could spit. Like, you could spit on the Sabbath. It was cool. But you had to be careful where. Because if you spit on dry dirt and you happen to step on it with your foot, well, you would be cultivating the ground. And that's work, and you can't do that on the Sabbath. I mean, that's to the extent. So you have a man carrying his mat doing work. You have Jesus healing someone, which is work. And so they're very frustrated with what's happening. But even as you look at all of this and their rules, it's kind of funny because you see the tide starting to turn. I mean, what is the guy's response to him breaking the rules? Think about it from the perspective of these people who they just want authority. They just want to be able to lord authority over people. What is his response to them? The guy who healed me told me to pick up my mat. I mean, what he's saying is yeah, he has more authority than you. If he has the authority to tell me I can walk, I'm going to follow the guy who lets me walk. And here's the thing, like, this would be a great place for the story to end. Right? Like, this would be a great place for it to be like, okay, yeah, that's it. We've got a man who was healed. Got religious people who are confused. But it doesn't end here. And the reason why it doesn't end here is because he doesn't know who healed him. And Jesus, in his grace, he's not going to waste that. He's not going to do something for someone without them being able to know there's more to it than that. This guy doesn't even know the name of Jesus at this point. So what Jesus does is he makes sure that he knows before he goes. Look at this here. So this is afterwards. So after all the commotion came about him walking, Jesus found him in the temple and said to him, "See, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you." The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. Hey, it was me, Jesus. Go and sin no more. Yeah, that was the guy. That's the guy who did it. Look at what happens. And this testimony is why the Jews are persecuting Jesus, because he was doing things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." It's another miracle. There would have been thousands of people in the temple. Jesus wants to seek out this one guy, and he's able to find him and have a conversation with him, because he wants to make sure that he knows who Jesus is. And really, it's like this end is it's heavy. It's sobering. It's forcing us to really look at that question, like, are we willing to do what it takes? And it's sobering for two reasons. One of them is, well, he says, sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. So what's worse than for 38 years being an invalid who can't walk, who's brought to the same place every single day in hopes of being able to step into some superstitious water and never even being able to step into the water. What's worse than that? Hell. Jesus is talking about hell. And while I don't really have much time to unpack that idea this morning, I would just say what the text says. And the text says, hey, that's worse than this. If you want more of a conversation about hell in our class, Reason for God, September 30th, we're going to talk about it in depth. So you can watch it online and catch up that way. But it forces us to look at our lives and say, okay, that's what happens when you say no to the question of whether or not he's worth it. And so Jesus wants to make sure, hey, I want to make sure that you understand if I'm worth it. And the other part of this text that is sobering, it's horrifying, and honestly, it's kind of frustrating, is that Jesus healed this man. This man who couldn't walk for 38 years. As soon as Jesus reveals himself to him, what does he do? He rats him out. And not only does he rat him out, look, it says this is what they used against him. What? They used this testimony against him when he was being crucified. Part of the reason why Jesus was considered guilty is because of what this guy did. And so as I close this morning, why would John choose this miracle? Why would Jesus heal this guy? What does this mean for us? This is a picture of grace. Because as easy as it is to point at that guy and say, what an idiot. If we were to be really honest, our story is this. If we look at the totality of our lives, we've done everything that he's done. I mean, don't think that you became a Christian all of a sudden because you were so great. No, you became a Christian because God sought you out and he found you and you put your faith in him. And let's just be really honest here. As much as we know the truth, as much as we know what God expects from us, as much as we know what God wants from us, we still have moments where we cling to things that are really nothing more than superstition, don't we? Where we put our trust in things that maybe bring some security, but they don't actually bring what we really need. We all do that, don't we? That when Jesus asks us, hey, do you want me to make you well? Oftentimes our first response isn't to take responsibility, is it? But it's to blame others for why we are where we are, isn't it? Just like that guy. And you might think, yeah, but Ryan, I didn't rat him out. I say, maybe you didn't rat him out, but I'll tell you what, he was up on that cross because of you. That he went there because of our sins. And realize, this guy wasn't the only sick person there that day. There were several other people that Jesus could have chosen to heal, but he chose him. And the reason why he chose him is because he looks like us. And so my question for you this morning is very simple, but do you want to be made well? And if you do you have the courage to do what it takes and the motivation to continue to try?